Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. How do you remember what you learn? What's your learning style? We've heard for years that they're visual learners, auditory, kinesthetic, etc. But when you're at a conference or in the boardroom or in a classroom even, are you feverishly taking notes or are you visualizing a concept and then taking what you've heard and applying it in a way that you can remember it well? Regardless of your learning habits, if someone caught you drawing out and sketching your thoughts as opposed to writing them down, would you be considered doodling or playing or learning? Jason Barron is a senior manager and creative leader in UX design, and he's the author of the Visual MBA, a book full of sketch notes for each class that visually captures the essential points of his education. And on this episode, we'll discuss sketchnoting and visual note-taking, MBA programs, UX design, why some kid won $3 million on Fortnite, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a sketch note master with a shark who doodles on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, please tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Shark, thank you so much for having me on your
You bet.
show. I'm a subscriber and I appreciate it. It's an honor. So, yeah, I grew up in Massachusetts. I had one brother. I grew up in a home that was over 150 years old. And my mom was a single mom. She was a teacher.
It's a new home in Massachusetts. So
yeah, exactly. So my mom was always super supportive of creativity, and I was always one to kind of draw and doodle and see things visually. And so she was super supportive of that growing up. And as I grew up, when I graduated high school, I went to college in Virginia. Southern Virginia University, and majored in information science and multimedia and design. And that's where I met my wife, Jackie. We are the parents of 5 children now.
Wow.
We've been married for 15 years and currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah. Right now, I work for a large nonprofit organization, and my focus is around digital product strategy and user experience. And so I'm very much involved in tech and that whole world of software and trying to create value for different audiences.
So, odd thing, and I saw this on your LinkedIn profile, but I wanted to ask you about it because a lot of people get locked in just because it's exciting as well. You were producing assets for Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Wii, and DS. First job in your career. How did you not get locked into the gaming industry? You could be the king of Fortnite today if you'd applied yourself,
I know, right? You know what? I school, I really loved 3D modeling and animation. Yeah. And the two big industries where that skill set is valued are video games and then, of course, in the entertainment movie industry. And so I kind of explored both of those. What would those look like? Right out of college, when my wife and I moved to Salt Lake from Virginia, I explored some different options. And there was a company in Salt Lake that was a video game company. And that was my very first job out of college. And so what I did was initially as a video game designer, which it's less visual. When you hear about design, you think about visuals, but
Sure.
It was more about, how is a game designed, and you're constructing it in Word docs and so forth. And I didn't love that. And so I got into the team that's working on different video games on the 3D team. So I would build out different assets within video games. You had mentioned those different video game platforms. And so we would create, 3D models and then the different graphics and textures that went on those models,
Mm-hmm.
and did that for those different video game platforms. It was really fun. I loved it. It was awesome. It just didn't pay great. It was the pay wasn't wonderful, and I had a young family at the time, and in the video game industry, there's a lot of extremely late hours. I mean, there were times I was getting home at 2, 3 in the morning. And so it wasn't super conducive to sort of that family lifestyle. I love to get in early and work hard and then be home with my kids. And so it was hard when sort of the culture is you show up at, 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon and stay till, after midnight. And so between those two things, the pay and also the hours not really being conducive to family life, that's when I made a decision to switch gears a little bit and focus on software.
Yeah, well, it's crazy when you think, especially today. I mean, you've done a lot in UX design as over your career, it looks like, but it's crazy to think about a Fortnite winner, somebody sitting on the other side of the joystick as opposed to a designer. But we've got a Fortnite championship winner that walked away with $3 million in the championship just recently. So I don't know what to encourage any of your children to study anymore.
Right.
You stuck in UX design. What excites you about that?
You mentioned Fortnite. I intentionally have not shared that story with my kids. My kids
Oh, I
love
bet.
Fortnite.
Yeah,
My and I don't want to I don't want to encourage any more playing than they already do. So it's unbelievable that award was that much. But it just goes to show video games are really popular, and it's a growing industry. For user experience design, I love people. I love understanding people. I love being with people, and I'm a user of software. We all basically are. And there were a lot of times where I'd be using software and it was just not intuitive, or it was frustrating, or it was just banging my head against the wall and thinking, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I started in web design, and really, when you think about web design, it's really you're taking requests from a client and building out a design,
sure.
really to their specifications and things. But user experience design is more than just the visuals. It's really understanding the job to be done for an individual. Why are they coming to use this software or this website? And really figuring out a way to understand that journey and reduce the friction in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's just super interesting being able to watch someone use a piece of software, an app or a website, and see their struggles, and then to be able to present a new design that reduces that friction, eliminates that friction, and actually in some cases creates delight, which is the ultimate objective of a user experience designer. It's completely satisfying.
Sure.
And user experience really, I believe, is the new competitive advantage for companies. You see the difference between two pieces of software. They both provide the same function. However, one has a better user experience. That one is going to win out over the other.
Absolutely.
So I see it as a growing need within different companies, and I think organizations are kind of waking up to the need for user experience. And so, for me, it's definitely something that's super valuable and interesting, and I'm very passionate about it.
Let's jump into the book then. So the Visual MBA. I'm real curious. At what point in your career, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the book, but what made you decide that you needed to go back and get an MBA?
That's a great question. I love startups. I love business. I was a founding partner of a startup that was acquired last year by Retail Me Not. I just
Yeah.
love business. And so I wanted to learn more. I felt like I had a knowledge gap with business, and I knew I loved it. I loved seeing things progress. I loved creating value for people, but there was a lot of nuts and bolts about business administration that I had no idea about, and I just felt like, hey, there's a big need there. And so really, I'm working doing user experience design and product strategy, and on the side, kind of doing some side hustles. It felt like it was the right time. And so, we had 4 kids at the time, my wife and I, and, I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to actually pull this off, but my wife was incredible. I mean, she's the most supportive person I've ever met. She was so supportive about it, encouraging me to do it, to get the MBA. And, it was funny. We had our 4 kids. We thought, hey, we're going to be done. Plans change. And, my wife got pregnant with our 5th child right after I got accepted in the MBA program. And so That was another stressor for me, but again, my wife was just incredible. She said, "We got this. We can handle it together. We'll make this happen together." So, at that point in my career, it just felt like the right time, and I had the support of my wife.
Sure.
Had I not had the support of my wife, it wouldn't have happened, honestly. But she was just so incredible in that process, and so that's when it just felt like the right time to do it, and I'm so glad I did.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about the book, then, The Visual MBA, 2 years of business school packed into one priceless book of pure awesomeness. I don't know that I've heard a better title for a book in a long time, one that's more descriptive and fun. But talk about the impetus of writing that book and describe the habit, if you will, of doodling.
Yeah, and that's kind of you to say about the title. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. I had heard about this concept called sketchnoting
Mm-hmm.
a while ago, years ago, and basically what the concept is for people that aren't aware of it is you're in a lecture or you're listening to someone speak or maybe you're in a meeting and you're capturing concepts visually. So you're drawing out these concepts, and you don't have to be a good artist necessarily to do this, but there are studies that show that retention rates increase when you're actually visually capturing something. And so you just capture these concepts and then put them together visually, and they end up as these cool artifacts later that you can go back and read and refer back to. So when I was starting my MBA, I had that thought, hey, I'm positive that no one else has been crazy enough to try and sketch note every single class while they're in class throughout a 2-year master's program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try this. At the outset, it was really sort of a, hey, what if I could do this? It wasn't necessarily, okay, here's my plan, I'm gonna make this happen, I'm gonna write a book at the end. But it was more to say, you know what, I would want this for myself later anyways to refer back to. Maybe some other people would find value in it, and maybe I could actually do this through the whole program. So I started from day one. And during class, I would just sketch note, just draw out these visual notes and break these complex concepts that were explained in a complex way and simplify them down to a way that other people could understand, and it would just be referred back to. And so I just kind of went through that process throughout each class, whether it be corporate finance or marketing or entrepreneurship, and as I was doing this, I started noticing a lot of people in class, sitting next to me, looking over my shoulder, just saying, "That is so cool."
Yeah.
Just having this big interest in what I was doing, and they're like, "Hey, if you do this throughout the program, I would love to.
Absolutely.
I would love to buy a book, right?
Yeah.
I would love to buy it." And so I thought, hey, maybe I will do that. Maybe I will just put this something together for a book for my classmates. So, I estimate I have 70 classmates. Okay. So maybe I could sell 70 copies of this book to my class. So, and maybe if I could get emails for the previous class, maybe I could just promote it there as well. So, went through the whole program, and, at the very end, I talked to a printer, and the printer said, "Hey, how many copies do you want?" I was thinking maybe 70, maybe, if I could get, the previous class, maybe 140 total. And she said, "Hey, you know what? You should think about doing a Kickstarter. With Kickstarter, you can, do a campaign, set it for a certain number of days, and then you'll know exactly how many copies to order." So that's actually what I decided to do. So I started a Kickstarter, set the date or the time frame for 28 days. I put together a fun video of my kids that are talking about how their dad likes to doodle in class, and you're not supposed to do that in class. And, they're kind of explaining the book concept. It was a cute little promotion for the book, for the Kickstarter. And, I set the goal for $7,000 within 28 days. And just in a few short days, the book had already reached its 100% goal. And it got onto Kickstarter's Projects We Love. It's this sort of coveted category on Kickstarter that's a curated list of projects. And after the 28 days, it had raised over $70,000 from over 40 countries around the
Amazing.
world.
Yeah.
And so there was this huge interest in it. And so for me, it was a big aha. It was, wow, there could be much bigger potential for this book. And when the Kickstarter, the big proof is in the pudding when people actually get the product, right? So you could always promote something, but the proof is in the pudding of the actual deliverable. And so I sent the books out after the end of the campaign and held my breath, and results started coming back that people loved it. I mean, loved it so much that they wanted to buy more copies. They wanted to give them as gifts. And so it really kind of exploded. And then Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, who's a really big publisher in the Northeast, they had an interest in the book. And so they published it for me in April of this year. And it's been fantastic. Last week, the ebook was on the Wall Street Journal's top 10 bestsellers list. And the plan is to have the book translated into 10 languages and distributed around the world. So it's just been an amazing surprise and journey through the whole process. And I'm so grateful that I took the time to actually attend the MBA program and take the notes, and it has really paid off.
Well, and it should be very easy to translate this book, because I mean, half of the page, if not more, is always taken up with pictures. So it's, these pictures translate, obviously, unless you're putting an accounting equation. I don't know what, A for assets and L for liabilities is in, Korean, but the rest of it's going to be fairly easy to draw, money and a lemonade stand and things like that, translate. But when you did this, did you go back and look at your classmates' notes just to see if that helped you at all? Because I tend to think of all the times I've been in classrooms and I see people just feverishly either typing or they're just scribing out as much as they can and spend all that time on their laptops. But I do agree. I don't know how often they're even hearing and letting this really sort of sink in as to what they're hearing from the professor or from anybody else that's speaking. Whereas if you're doodling, you're triggering something else, I'm assuming, in your brain that helps you intake what you're actually hearing. And so when you've had these doodles for the same thing somebody else has taken notes for, have you ever compared the two and thought, yeah, this is where the doodles made more sense to me?
That's a great question. You had mentioned something being activated in the brain. There's been some studies done fairly recently about the process of drawing actually helps with retention, and even in older folks that it can actually help with dementia and other things by actually capturing things visually from learning them. I did every once in a while, just in discussions, see people's notes every once in a while. But I didn't do this sort of a comparative analysis on, what's the difference between other students' notes and mine. And certainly looking at the process of note taking for myself historically versus visually, I mean, it's night and day difference as far as how much more effective it is doing the sketch notes. And when I showed my sketch notes to the class, I mean, I think every single student in my class bought the book, and
Wow.
And we're so grateful that they said, hey, this is awesome. This helps me remember what we learned in class, and everyone said it provided a ton of value. And so that's to me was a big indicator that it actually captured the essence of what was being taught. I also ran some of these chapters by the professors that they taught, and just to make sure, hey, does this really capture what you're trying to teach and things? And they loved it. They said, this is awesome. And one of them said, hey, can you add one additional framework in there that isn't there? So I actually took their feedback and added a couple things that I didn't capture in the notes, but the vast majority, I would say, 98% was from the original capturing of the notes.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they looked at somebody else's notes that somebody wrote out, would that capture 98% of it? I doubt that it would capture the spirit as much as what your doodling captured. When you were getting your undergrad, were you a note taker? I mean,
I
granted,
was a note.
you had a 10-year split between when you got your almost 10 years between when you got your undergrad and MBA, but I'm curious if you were feverishly taking notes at the time, and did any of that help you start this? You know, was it a 10-year process to start doodling?
That's a great question. I when I was getting my undergrad, I was a note taker, and I was always kind of I'm always searching for the better way to do something.
Yeah.
Like regardless of what it is in my life, I'm just if it's my yard or whatever. Like I'm always looking for a better way to accomplish
Mm-hmm.
an objective, and the same thing goes for note taking. So in my undergrad, I was doing notes sort of the traditional way.
Yeah.
Then I read about the Cornell, I believe it was Cornell note taking method, where you start taking your notes in one column, and then you kind of have triggers on the left hand column, and then at the bottom a summary. And that was pretty interesting, a pretty interesting way to take notes. It was better than sort of the traditional note taking method. But then when I learned about the sketch noting, and unfortunately I learned about it after my undergrad.
Yeah.
But once I did learn about that, it's been night and day difference. If I go to conferences, a lot of times I'll go to conferences, and you'd mentioned the marketing conferences and so forth. I As I take sketch notes in the past, if I didn't take any notes, I just sort of attended the conference. I'd walk away, maybe remember 5 or 10% of the conference, if that. But now I can look back at my sketch notes and recall so much more from conferences that I've attended over the years. And so it's just really kind of proven out to be a really effective method. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners are saying, hey, I can't draw at all. So that sounds nice, but
Right. Right.
but that doesn't apply to me. But it actually doesn't matter. I had a friend of mine who his kids, he was trying to teach them about sketchnoting, and he was sitting down with his daughter, and he had his daughter read a book, and then he also was telling her some stories, and he wanted her to sketch note, what she was learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how old she was. I think she was under 8 years old, and she was drawing stick figures
Yeah.
and boxes, and then months later, he said, "Hey, remember that book?" And he showed her the picture, and then she was able to say, "Oh yeah, and that's when this happened, and then this, and then that," and she was able to recall details around the images that she had drawn, regardless of how good they were. I mean, they're stick figures, and that's totally fine. And so, any reader or any listener that's listening to this right now can try it out. Go to your next conference, or listen to a TED Talk or something, and just start drawing the concepts as you're listening to them, no matter how bad you are at thinking about drawing. And you'll be surprised if you go back several weeks or several months later, how much you're able to recall just because you went through that activity of documenting that visually.
Well, granted, you can do this at a conference, you can do this in a classroom because they want you to take some form of notes. But when you started doing this, did you do it at work, and did your boss look at you and go, what in the world is Jason doing? He's over there doodling and drawing pictures. Because, you know, being somebody that's working in UX design, it obviously makes sense to doodle some things out, but not all of them. Did you ever get questions from anybody who thought you were just playing?
You know what? That's a great question. I think that the biggest hurdle people are going to run into is that self-conscious feeling that they're doodling while they should be paying
Yeah.
attention. And the reality is they're actually, even in many cases, paying attention more when they're doodling. A lot of times you're checking email or whatever else. But I being, as you mentioned, being a UX designer, it's sort of expected that you're sketching out concepts and wireframes and ideas and so forth. And so I never got questioned about it. And of course, now it's sort of an expectation.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sketchnoting in meetings.
Well, I mean,
But
I'm sure that somebody's probably said, "There's Jason not paying attention. He's doodling again." No, the guy's got a bestseller called the Visual MBA. I mean, he's known for doodling, so it makes perfect sense with you. But maybe not everybody that wants to do more than stick figures.
right, right, exactly. And I think the more stories people can hear about successes with visual note taking and so forth, they can point back to say, actually, no, I'm not doodling this idea called sketchnoting. Check this out. Hey, there's this book called the Visual MBA. This guy, he actually captured his whole MBA in sketch notes.
Right.
And, so I think the more people are able to tie back to, hey, this is actually a concept and proven scientifically to help with retention. I think that embarrassment or self-consciousness will go away over time.
So when you're doing this, when you're taking notes, and there's a lot of good ways to take notes, but generally you're looking for the keywords, you're looking for the key statistics that, stand out. What were you grasping from a conversation that thought, and I'm using a couple of examples from early chapter in your book where you've got a lemonade stand or some guy dressed up in a suit or some, cash dollar bills sketch. I mean, what were you grasping that said, here's what, my professor said to, I'm going to draw something? I mean, there must have been something that helped you form what you were going to draw.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. For sure, when I'm going through, what I'm trying to do is not only just capture what they're saying, but really kind of capture the essence and the
Right.
meaning. And if they're saying it in a really complicated way, I mean, there's ways you can say something in a super complicated way or a super simplified way,
Yeah.
and both teach you the same thing. And so I love minimalism and simplicity and being able to break concepts down. And so for me, I was sort of doing a translation from, okay, the professor's talking and saying this in a super complicated way. How could I break that down to its essence so that way it's more approachable and fun for people to actually understand, because they're going to understand the same concept. Why do we have to make it, I'm not saying that professors were dry at all. I had amazing professors, but some concepts, like, why do we have to present them in a dry way? Why
Exactly.
not make it more approachable and fun and still teach the same concept? And so that was kind of the translation I was going through was, okay, they're talking about stocks here, and they're talking about, percentage of ownership, and they're talking. So what's a fun way I could kind of distill that down? Well, hey, let's break it down. If you're having a lemonade stand, everyone's familiar with the lemonade stand. Maybe as a child you created one, and it's pretty basic. You're selling lemonade, and so how can I break that concept about stocks or about operations to a lemonade stand? The principles still apply, but it helps people understand it, and then they're able to apply it in their work, regardless of whether they're an executive at some tech company, or they're working for some manufacturing operations group. They can still learn those principles that were simplified in such a way that they can apply it in a much more approachable way in their day-to-day work.
So have you found anything while doing this that you learned you didn't capture as well by doodling? And the reason I ask that is if somebody also wants to go start doing this and they start drawing stick figures or boxes or whatever it is there something that they should capture note wise? And everybody's going to have their own process and figure out their own process. This isn't one set way, as you've described, that anybody could draw anything differently and still capture their own view of it. But is there anything you've seen that you notice just generally was better done by writing it out as opposed to doodling it?
The main thing that comes to mind when you ask that is things that need to be captured in an exact way, such as a formula. So
Sure.
You'll look at your present value, future value formula. That's not something that you would want to necessarily miss or try and you still want to illustrate what it means, but there's power in the formula because you're plugging in certain values in a variable and seeing an end result. So you have to have that formula. So that's one case where chapter on page 42, 43, it kind of shows the present value, future value calculations. That's one where I took some notes, or maybe I took a picture on my cell phone, so I captured the actual formula, so that way while I'm doodling, I didn't miss that part, so then I could make sure that I captured that exact formula. Other than that, honestly, I think a lot of it can be based on concepts and distilling it down to the essence of what's being taught. But where things have to be exact, that's where, capturing it either on your phone, like if you're at a conference. I've been at a lot of conferences too, where they have a lot of data, displaying.
Hmm.
That's when you're not going to be able to capture in time, if you're sketchnoting it. So maybe just whip out your cell phone and take a quick picture, and then just keep doodling, and then maybe look at the data and see what applies to you. If everything does, then maybe print that out and put it in your journal, your sketch note journal, and and away you go. But yeah, that's from what I've seen is the main item that you'd want to capture in sort of in an exact way.
So often, education today comes under fire for the value. And I know this book wasn't written to defend or contradict anybody's opinions about college, but higher ed has come under such, fire for the last decade or so. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people that are offering online courses in all
Right.
different formats, and you see a lot of people who know that it's maybe a master's degree or a college degree of any kind. College degrees have been dropped as requirements by a lot of major companies, and there are a lot of good reasons that a lot of college programs aren't necessarily always providing what they need to. But I
Yep.
also often put it back on the students for not taking enough from the class, and maybe that's not all their fault. Maybe they didn't apply a different way of learning like you have. Did you
Yeah.
find that you got more out of your MBA because of how you applied this practice to learning for your MBA as opposed to how you learned while you were getting your undergrad degree?
Yeah, so that's it's a really good question. I've actually thought a lot about this. I thought a lot about that even before I got my MBA. The question about higher ed and coming under fire and things. And I think so. So two thoughts. One is, the first one briefly. I think with whenever an organization is more focused on making money than providing value, that's when
Sure.
there's a problem. And I think, unfortunately, I think um, some educational institutions have done that,
Absolutely.
and so I think that's a problem. But I think about education, structured education in higher ed. I think of it as a education experience. It's more than just the material. It's the people that you're with. It's the
Yeah.
conversations that you have. It's the conversations that you have after class about a concept and how it applies to your work and how. So for me, I got a lot of value out of it. The Marriott School of Business, BYU's Marriott School of Business, where I went to school. It's a top 50 MBA program. They have fantastic professors. I you know I think there was definitely a ton of value in having the educational experience as a whole. Now, I would say that in the future, I mean, Clayton Christensen has talked about. I was actually at a dinner. Clayton Christensen was speaking, and he was talking about the future of colleges being disrupted, and as we know it, and I actually see that happening. Um, but I think there's a place. I think it's that middle place where you're getting value from an education, and I'm a firm believer that education helps people make better decisions in their lives. And how can we provide that value to someone in an affordable way, because it's just insane right now for college expenses. And again, I think it comes down to, in some cases, not all, but in some cases, where again the focus is on making a profit versus actually providing value for people in their lives. And so once we can change that, then I think we'll be in great shape. And how education is delivered in the future, whether that just be digitally, who knows what that'll look like. I'm excited for the future potential of what education could be.
And just as a side thought, it makes you wonder if somebody like you, it would almost be better served if you were given a test to doodle out what you were thinking than necessarily recite it, because again, that triggers a different part of the brain. Um, you know, Maybe a more creative approach to solving a problem, for example, as opposed to just what you can remember with a note. And sometimes that that cookie cutter approach that so many people take with education. I love the idea. I mean, to me, the way you learned is as much of a disruption as all the other things going on in education, because I don't think that's ever, people don't look at necessarily the different ways to learn as much as we just go attack colleges and universities for, the cookie cutter approach that we're so used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would love to see the day where, rather than just a standardized approach of teaching, we would teach kids and adults in ways that
Yeah.
they learn, and really personalized learning. And the way we have education structured right now, it's not personalized. It's sort of we deliver the same thing to everybody in the same way, and I just strongly challenge the effectiveness in the future of that approach. I think the future will be tailoring learning to people's strengths, and having it be much more personalized.
So now when your kids draw and doodle, how much of it do you let them get away with versus tell them no, they've got to go back and work on their actual schoolwork, or do they always drop in and just say, Dad, we're doing what you did. You're the one that taught us.
I am 100% supportive of my kids doodling, as long as it, deals with the actual thing that's being taught.
Yeah.
And I'm also very encouraging of my kids doodling outside of class too, just in general drawing. And I think today there's so many kids. I mean, we've been trying to delay getting our kids a cell phone. I have a 13-year-old now, and we've just been saying, let's hold off as long as we possibly can. We have a family cell phone, but I think kids today are just spending way too much time just consuming other people's ideas, and consuming content around them, that they're not spending enough time creating. So for me, I am just a huge supporter of my kids creating, doodling, making something unique and original that's their own, versus just consuming everyone else's. And I think we've sort of hit a spot as a sort of a society where there's just way too much consuming versus creating. So, but that's kind of a long answer to your question, but really kind of in summary, yes, I'm totally supportive of my kids doodling. And if they're doodling in class, as long as they're sketchnoting, so they're actually doing it to pay attention and understand the concepts, I'm totally supportive.
Well, you live near Salt Lake City, and I don't recall any sharks that have ever been in Salt Lake. Thank goodness, unless it was in some bad movie. But got to ask you a question. You're on a shark's perspective, talking to a guy nicknamed Shark. I've got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
You know what? That's a great question. And so I'm from Massachusetts. That's where I grew up. And the movie Jaws is stories based in Massachusetts. And I was actually reading on the news recently about a big influx in great white sharks. And for me, I'm just super interested in great white sharks for sure. Mainly because they kind of freak me out, and I'm just interested in that. My wife and I got scuba certified, and I would actually really like to cage dive with some great white sharks.
I've done it.
That. Oh, you have?
Oh yeah.
Oh no! How's that experience?
It's amazing.
That sounds amazing. That'll be on my bucket list for sure.
Yeah, but yeah, Amity Island was the fictional island off the coast of New England for the Jaws franchise. So,
yeah.
Well, Jason, it's a special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Absolutely, I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Number 1, another Utah treasure: Donny Osmond or Marie Osmond? One was a Dancing with the Stars winner, and the other I see on a commercial about every 10 minutes.
You know what? Donny Osmond cracks me up. I've seen him at a conference. He was hilarious. I would say based on exposure, Donny.
All right. Number 2, an undergrad degree or a master's degree?
Ooh. I would say foundationally, making sure you got your undergrad degree is really important. That's what I would tell my kids. If you can get a master's degree, awesome. But making sure you do have that undergrad degree is critical.
All right. This is for movies. I'm a movie buff, and there are a lot of films that were done in Utah. Back to the Future 3, or the most recent version of the Lone Ranger movie.
Oh, okay. You know what? Back to the Future 3 was one of the few movies we owned growing up, and I've watched it like a million times, and I love it. So I would say definitely Back to the Future 3.
Yeah, they were both bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the new Lone Ranger, which should have
Right.
never been made. With Johnny Depp as Tonto, that was horrible. So, number 4.
I'm glad I didn't say that one then.
Yeah. Number 4, Hilton Hotels or Marriott.
You know what? That one's easy for me.
Yeah, that was a softball.
Having gotten my education at the Marriott School of Business at Brigham Young University, I would definitely say Marriott.
Okay. Number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, gosh. I would say that's a tough one. I would say biscuits.
Okay.
I love them both, but biscuits.
All right. So, Jason, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of the book, social channels, and where do you want them to connect?
Great. So I've started posting some additional sketch notes on my Instagram. So Instagram is a great place to reach me. My Instagram is just at Visual MBA. So just follow me on Instagram. That's probably the best place. And feel free to comment on there, and I'll reply. I see all the comments and I reply to them. And people can buy the book on Amazon for sure, and Barnes & Noble. I believe it's nationwide in Barnes & Noble. So it should be at your local bookstore in Barnes & Noble. And then, and also if you want to reach out as well, jasonbarron.com. That's Barron, Barron, so the 2 R's. I'd love to connect and hear what your listeners are working on, and it's great to be on the show, Shark. Yeah. I really appreciate it. As I'd mentioned, I'm a subscriber. I've listened to some of the podcasts already, and love the show. And so keep up the great work.
I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Jason Barron, a senior manager and creative leader in UX design, and he's the author of the Visual MBA, a book full of sketch notes for each class that visually captures the essential points of his education. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, he sees UX as a new and competitive advantage for companies, and I agree. It's another reason why how he studied and took notes meant a lot to me. How someone breaks things down, in this reference, visually, can have a tremendous effect on a user. It's more complex than that, obviously, but it shouldn't be so complex to the end user that clever gets in the way of ease of use. Second, how you learn oftentimes is as important as what you've learned. Don't you remember times in classrooms or in meetings or in conferences when you saw someone feverishly taking notes? How much do you think they actually remember? Or do they only go back and read their notes later to learn it? But then you miss some of it. How do you break things down from a complex way to simple thoughts that you can remember? Not everyone learns the same. But it doesn't matter if it's via audio, visual, kinesthetic, or any other format, unless you can remember what you've heard, which is what his learning style was. What do you think you'll get from an MBA if it's only a way to improve your shorthand? What does a stenographer remember from a conversation, even if they've scribed every word perfectly correct? Not much. If you are not learning enough from listening, then change the way you learn. That's what he did. Third, yes, some colleges have done a poor job with teaching skills to students. However, a lot of the value is teaching you to learn. In this case, teaching you ways to learn. A lot of the responsibilities fall on the colleges and universities, and that's why that industry over the last 2 decades has been disrupted. However, whether you're in the classroom or in the boardroom, challenge yourself to be intuitive enough to learn in a way that best fits you. He also mentioned that a lot of people would be super self-aware about doodling. Don't listen to that voice. Think about the best way that you can capture the spirit of a conversation, and then take that and transform it into something you put on paper. It doesn't have to be words necessarily. Sometimes it could be by drawing, but not everything can be captured by doodling as well. Things that need to be captured in an exact way maybe shouldn't. Sometimes you need an exact formula that goes beyond the spirit of an equation. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. So if you're doodling right now while listening to your favorite shark, make sure I look handsome, will you? So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.